Hello there, welcome to our show. My name is Doshima Dapoyewale and I'm the founder of the Early Birth Foundation. It's my pleasure to present the 6-part series podcast, My Neonatal Story. This show is our contribution to celebrations for World Prematurity Day 2021. Please share with your friends and family, leave us a comment, and follow us on Instagram at EBFNIG. Up next, I'll introduce today's guest. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining us today. Kobe is the founder of the Healing Circle, so I'm going to hand it over to you, Kobe, to tell us a little bit about the Healing Circle before we get into our interview today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So the Healing Circle Therapy and Wellness Center is based in Charlotte, North Carolina. It is my therapy and wellness organization where I provide trauma-informed therapy for people who identify as Christian and people who don't. And then I also provide wellness resources like coaching, guided meditations, things of the like that help people essentially engage in their healing process in any stage that they're willing to engage in it. And yeah, so I love it. It's my little baby and we're going on year 4.
What's the most interesting thing you've learned about sort of working with people through their trauma?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think the most interesting thing is that everyone really is a reflection of what they got or didn't get in childhood.
Wow.
I think my oldest client was 68. A lot of what we were processing was the unresolved grief of losing their parent when they were around 3 or 4 years old.
Wow.
And how that had shaped their life all the way up to 68. I also think what's beautiful is that we are so much stronger than we think we are. And we have so much more capacity than we think we do. And that we need each other to bring that out of each other.
When was your child born and how old are they now? And just sort of walk us through your pregnancy and how your NICU journey began.
Absolutely. So my son Levi was born on March 13th at 3:18 a.m. He was supposed to be born on April 9th. And he came a bit early. And, for the most part, my pregnancy was pretty normal up until my 3rd trimester. I had really bad morning sickness my 1st trimester. My 2nd trimester, I felt like I was on top of the world. I had all the energy. And then my 3rd trimester came and I started to notice that I was losing weight. And losing weight enough to the point that people started asking me if I'd already had the baby.
Oh, wow.
Because I was just getting so small. I still had a stomach, but people know when you have a baby, you still have a bit of a stomach. And I remember calling the doctor and saying, I'm losing a lot of weight. Something doesn't seem right. Something doesn't seem normal. And the doctor's response was, are you a first-time mom? And I said, yes. And she said, well, you're just worried. You're just anxious. I'm sure the baby's fine. I'm sure you're all right. The story will take super long if I tell it all in detail. So I'll hit the main points. So I go into a doctor's appointment. It was the first of my last 4 weeks of appointments. And so I went in and they were like, and I was a little bit late. And so I kind of jogged in and they were like, oh, your blood pressure's a little bit high. But you did just run in. So, we'll take it again at the end of the appointment. They took it again at the end of the appointment and it was even higher.
Oh, wow.
And they were like, well, we're going to send you in to do some blood work and then we're going to send you home. They sent me to the hospital to do blood work and I did not come home for another 21 days.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, I went in and it was just thing after thing. They essentially found that my son, the hospital that I was at found that he had an enlarged right atrium and that he had a liver malformation and a irregular heartbeat. So they thought that he might need heart surgery after he was born. So they transferred me to a bigger hospital in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And when I got there, they were like, hey, how big did they say your baby was? And I said, they said he was normal size. They said he was about 6 pounds, and they looked me in the eye and were like, your baby is not even 4 pounds.
Wow.
And we need to do an emergency C-section right now, or he's not going to make it.
Wow.
So what they caught at Chapel Hill was that he had, I think it's called intrauterine growth restriction.
Okay.
And that came from my placenta had torn off from my uterus. So he was not getting any nutrients for quite a while.
Wow.
And so he was teeny weeny weeny. And so I tried to go through labor the vaginal way. But as he moved down the canal, his heart kept stopping because he was just so frail and couldn't take the pressure. So then that's when they took me into emergency C-section. And I'll skip over all the crazy stuff. Long story short, there's so many complications. I found out that I was allergic to morphine and that they accidentally gave me too much morphine. When I was trying to do the vaginal birth, they had punctured my dura, which is the sac that holds the fluid in your spine and your brain, when they had given me an epidural. So I had several complications, but on my son's side, he was so tiny. He had rubellum, which is jaundice. He was not eating, so he had to have a tube. His APGAR test, which is like the test of survivability, from 1 to 10, he was a 2 when he came out. I just remember him being so tiny and purple and just being so afraid. And we lived in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is 3 hours away. So we had, 2 hours away, but we had to head home before him. So he stayed in the NICU we were there for either 3 or 4 days. And then they essentially said, we need your bed. So I had to leave, go to Wilmington. And then 2 days later, they transferred him to Wilmington. And then from there, he was in the NICU for another 21 days.
Wow. Yeah. Did you ever go back to that doctor and be like, hey, you kind of really missed something huge here?
Yeah, I never got the opportunity to, but what's interesting is, so North Carolina has a incredibly high infant mortality rate for Black women.
Wow.
I think we're it's really bad. And Wilmington in North Carolina has a rate that's 4 times North Carolina's rate, just the city.
Wow.
And so the hospital had honestly come under scrutiny because of how many Black women had an experience that was similar to mine. Wow. Where they were coming to their OBs with complaints or concerns, and the response was just like, you're being dramatic, you're fine, this is just what pregnancy feels like, only for them to be in situations where they've either lost the baby or gone into early labor or had children who ended up in the NICU in a way that was preventable. So much so that hospital doesn't even exist anymore. My son's 3 years old and that hospital got shut down.
No way.
Mm-hmm. I think it was shut down and then bought out by another hospital chain. Yeah. But they had such a clear-cut reputation of treating Black children poorly. I think their rate there was a statistic they shared. I know I'm going to butcher it, but I know the essence of what I'm saying is true. Essentially, the statistics from that hospital were like, your child, if you were a Black woman, your child was 3 times more likely to either die or end up in the NICU if your doctor was white.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a pretty traumatic situation, and there were other misses and terrible situations that happened that caused us to have to reach out to the hospital administration and write them a letter and meet with them and be like, this is unacceptable, because it was just absolutely the way that we were treated was we were completely dismissed. And then when they found out they were wrong, they were just kind of like, oh, sorry, happens.
You and your son went through a lot in the first session. I mean, how do you find out that you're allergic to morphine?
Yeah, so that was probably one of the things that was not preventable, because I'd never had morphine previously. And that's typical for them to provide morphine when they're giving, when you're having a C-section. And I found out I was allergic because once my body started to like unnumb, get some feeling back, my skin was burning and itching at the same time. I don't know if you've ever had a relaxer before.
Yes.
It was like someone had slathered every inch of my body in a relaxer and just left it there.
Oh, wow.
So like I have pretty dark skin, but my skin was like bright red.
Oh, wow.
And I had hives all over. I had hives in between my eyelash, and I didn't even get to hold him for the first couple of days. I was in so much pain. When your dura is punctured, when you sit up, what happens is all the fluid in your skull drains out, which leaves your brain just sitting in a hard skull. And what that feels like is like immense pressure on your skull. And so I had the hives, and I had the C-section scar, and I could not sit up for the first 2 days because I had my spine punctured when I got the epidural for when I was trying to do labor vaginally.
I'm actually just in shock. When you've been administered morphine and you found out you're allergic, did they sort of like flush it out of your system? And, now you're telling me that it actually took like a couple of days for you to be weaned off the effect of the morphine. At the same time, you've got the puncture in your dura. You've also got the C-section scar. You've just had a very traumatic experience. You've not gotten the chance to hold your baby. You're in hospital.
Yep. And I wish that was
normal.
I wish that was.
A part of me is like, wow, do Black women just have a high threshold for pain and stress? Or like, are we like, maybe we've got kryptonite? Like, are we actually superhuman? Because I don't understand how one individual can go through all of this. You sound very happy and normal.
Yeah. And, that wasn't even, that's not even the half of it. That's not even the half of what happened. They punctured several blood vessels in my hand, and so my hand was like swollen to like the size of like a grapefruit. And this is all happening at the same time. Essentially, when we got removed from the hospital, they removed us because I refused. I had so many complications, and almost every complication came from me saying I don't want to do that, and the doctor saying you really should. And so my blood pressure was high after the baby, obviously, because of all the things that happened. And they were like, you really should take this medication. I said, I'm not listening to you guys anymore, and I'm not taking this medication. And they said, okay. And that was, I think, around 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning. And they said, okay, you need to be out by 8 a.m. then. And so we literally got kicked out of the hospital. And I'm trying to breastfeed during this time. So we were in a Motel 6 that was 15 minutes away from the hospital. And we're driving back and forth every 3 hours to feed the baby from the Motel 6 because they kicked us out of the hospital because I wouldn't take any more of the medication. I don't think that Black women are superhuman. I think we just have a spirit in us that refuses to give up. I really believe that. I really feel like we're just like for me, that was my first child. So for me, it was like, I am going to live. Yeah. I'm going to, and there was a point where like in the midst of all these complications and my heart rate kept going up, and then they would run in and say, you're about to seize, and like literally put a mask over it was just like crazy. And it got to one point where I don't know if you're aware of the Little Blue Book, but the Little Blue Book is like a tiny portable will that they give you at the hospital if you might pass away. And the nurse came in with a tiny blue book and was like, hey, you and your husband might want to go over this. Essentially saying like, we're not sure if you're going to make it out. And I think that I can talk about it with a sense of freedom and lightheartedness now, because, I mean, to be honest, the reality is it has fueled so much of what I do now because I stayed home with my son. Oh, all of this is during my last semester of grad school.
Wow.
And so I was in the NICU writing my final papers while healing. And, they say you're not supposed to drive the first month or so after you have a C-section. While we're in the hospital, my husband got a job promotion that required him to be gone 15 days a month, every month, including weekends. Wow. And so I pretty much for the first 9 months had our son alone while healing. And it was so much. But a lot of what I do now, me starting my own private practice, me having the healing circle, me doing what I do on Instagram, a lot of it came from that experience. A lot of it came from, it was hard to find work that reflected my need as a mother to be there for my kids. But then also, I knew I did not want another Black woman to go through what I was going through and not have someone who could identify. So a lot of me wanting to open up the healing circle was me wanting to provide like a safe space and resource for Black women and women in general who've experienced traumatic birth stories, because there's a very long grieving period that comes with it. You know, it's very heartbreaking when it's your first child and you're hearing everyone talk about how beautiful and easy their labors were. And for us, it's like, I almost died.
The thing I keep feeling when I speak to you is, I'm not alone in this. When you're looking at like the picture perfect Instagram mommies and, you're reading about the perfect birth stories where you got to fluff your hair and put your baby on your chest and breastfeed in like 30 seconds, that wasn't anywhere close to, what happened to me. Like, as traumatic as what you're telling me is, it also feels very comforting because I'm like, wow, I'm not alone. Someone else went through an experience like mine, and I'm actually not alone in this. Wow, we need to find everyone so that people that have gone through this don't feel alone. Because you were in school, so you were in your final semester and you were writing exams in the NICU. Like, how did you concentrate? Because like one of the things I always hated about NICU was the sound of like all the little monitors. Just,
oh
like,
my gosh.
Beep, beep, yeah. Beep, beep. Literally, it's so triggering when I hear like random beeps. Just takes me back. So how were you even concentrating to like complete academic work in the NICU?
If I'm being honest, I feel like I just kind of shut down and did what I had to do. If that makes sense. Yeah. Like, it sounds crazy, but it almost feels like it wasn't me there. Yeah. Like, it was just like almost like a shell of myself that just showed, that knew I had no choice and I had to do what I had to do. Because I feel like it did not hit me. Everything I'd been through did not hit me until 6 weeks later when my son was out of the NICU and I was walking across the stage at my graduation. And it was the first time in over a month and a half that I'd seen people that were not in a hospital. It was the first time I got to go back home. Mm-hmm. I couldn't even sleep in my room because I was so used to the sounds of the hospital. Like, I couldn't sleep.
Yeah.
Like it was just, I was so used to, the beeping and the sounds, and the nurse comes in and leaves and the baby's crying, and the lights are always on, felt like I was thrown back into real life. And it felt like I had become a vastly different person as I was thrown back in, but everybody else was the same. And I didn't really know how to interact with that. It was lonely with my parents and my in-laws who all were so loving and kind and wanted to help, but I feel like they wanted me to be like happy and excited about having this baby. And I was so happy and excited about having this baby, but I was also simultaneously grieving. Like, what the heck just happened to me? I went into a routine appointment and came out with surgery scars and a baby that is tiny. And then being thrown into the everyday work of having to be a mom, you don't even get time to process what happened to you.
Yeah.
It's like you get out of the NICU and then you have to be a mom. You're thrown like from this really traumatic medical situation into staying up all night, breastfeeding, changing diapers. Like, I think that there are some ways that right now I'm still processing, even after I've had another child. There's some ways that I'm still processing what that felt like because I haven't had much time to just stop and sit with it.
Exactly, and sit with it. You've had another child. How was that experience different? How did you feel when you found out you were pregnant with your second child?
I found out I was pregnant with my second child 2 days before lockdown started.
Oh,
so
wow.
My entire pregnancy was in the pandemic. I was very anxious. My husband couldn't come with me to any appointments because this is the very beginning of the pandemic.
Okay.
And this is the part of the pandemic when they said, "Oh, it's only going to be 2 weeks, and then the lockdown will be lifted." This is the part of the pandemic where no one could leave their house, or else you would get pulled over by the police. So this is even like, oh, you can just go to the store, go to Walmart. You couldn't leave, you couldn't leave the house. I was very anxious. I wanted everything to go exactly the way I planned because everything last time had gone so awry. Yeah. I planned to have a home birth. I got a...
Wow, really?
Yeah. So that's a story too. I planned to have a home birth. I got a midwife. I got a doula. I was like, I'm doing all natural. I'm not, no medication. I know what happened. And then the time came, and unfortunately, my midwife was really insensitive, just not present, not there. I didn't feel very comfortable with her. I was in labor for 40 hours total. And 38 of those hours, I was at home. I was bleeding a lot, and I just kept feeling like, is something, like, what's going on? Something must be wrong. And I'm freaking out, right?
Yeah.
So finally, at hour 38, my midwife leaves without asking or telling us. She leaves the house to go eat.
Oh, wow.
And doesn't say, and we're like, where are you? And she's like, oh, I went to go get some food. And we're like, can you come back? And she's like, well, I'm waiting on the baby. And no, she said, I'm waiting on my food. And we were like, what? So we are over here just pissed off. And that was the moment I said, I'm in so much pain. I'm going to the hospital. I'm getting medication. So I went to the hospital, and one thing, I was in so much pain. I was in so much pain that, I know this may trigger someone, I was in so much pain that I literally was like, I just want to die right now. I can't take it anymore. I just want to die. I can't do it. And I really thought I would never see my kid, because I was just like, I'm in so much pain. There's no way I'm going to survive.
Wow.
Get to the hospital, and they're like, while you're in a lot of pain, what's going on? They check, and my son, who was massive, who's was he 8 pounds 4 ounces? He was massive.
Wow.
He was in a position where his head was pinching my spine. And that's why I was in so much pain. Girl,
your spine has been through it.
Been through it, okay? My spine has been all the way through it, to hell.
It needs a vacation.
Please tell my husband. Tell everyone, tell my clients, my husband, tell my bank account. Yeah, so he was pushing on my spine. And so he was in a position where my spine could have been irreparably damaged if I didn't go to the hospital. And I forgot what they did, but they did something that essentially helped turn his head just a little bit towards my cervix. But if I would have started pushing with him in that position, it could have really damaged my spinal cord. And so I ended up being really glad that I went to the doctor, because I think in the end, even though it wasn't what I wanted, I felt good knowing I made the decision to come to the doctor. Yeah. I made the decision to say, yes, I want an epidural. Yes, I want pain medication. I made that decision. And for me, the second pregnancy was redemptive, because I got to choose what was best for me, even if it wasn't what I planned. In the end, I made the decision. I know my midwife was incredibly disappointed in me, and said a few insensitive things to the likeness of, well, moms who have C-sections usually can't. They're essentially saying they're too mentally weak to be able to do natural births. So I wasn't surprised that you ended up deciding to go to the hospital. And so it left me in a place where I think that was the beginning of me losing another layer of caring about what people think. Yeah. And being like, what, if you think I'm weak or whatever, or less of a mother because I'm taking care of my body the way that I need to, then you can think that,
Wow. I'm curious about, your husband, how does he feel? Or, what was his experience like, watching you go through these very challenging situations?
Well, I think my husband, it really opened his eyes in, I don't want to say a negative way, but I think that it opened his eyes in a way that really broke his heart, to be honest. He comes from a military family. He has a lot of trust in structures and the government and, all that stuff, where I am very wary, with my African background, I don't trust them. Not that I don't trust them, rather that my trust goes to a certain degree, right? Yeah. I think for him, he started to develop a sense of mistrust too, because I would say something's wrong. They would say nothing's wrong. And he'd be like, babe, they said nothing's wrong. And then later on, we'd find out that something was wrong, And so, I said to one of the doctors, I'll never forget, this is after the first time they tried to put the epidural in with my first son, they pricked my spine and my leg jumped by itself.
Wow.
And I said, you just hit my spine. And I said, I'm in pain. You just hit my spine. I can feel everything. And he said, no, you're just feeling pressure. I know you think it's pain. You're just feeling pressure. So the attending comes in and says, how much of, I forgot what it is, but essentially how much of the anesthetic did you give her? And the resident says, oh, I gave this much. And the attending says, that's not nearly enough. That's not nearly enough. And like runs to inject my back with more local anesthetic. And the attending is like so embarrassed and apologetic because he was essentially saying like, you pretty much they were putting something in your spine and you pretty much had no anesthesia. I could feel it all. And I told them that. And they didn't believe me. And my husband was just like, it's just pressure, babe. I know it feels like pain. It's just pressure. But then the attending comes in and validates the fact that they didn't give me enough of the anesthetic. And so I could feel it all. And I said to the resident, I said, you are an expert of bodies, but you're not an expert of my body. Like, yes. I know what I am feeling in my own body. Yeah. And so I need you to trust me when I say my own body hurts, because you don't know what I'm feeling in my body, but I do. And I think it opened my husband's eyes to like, wow, there is injustice in the medical space. We've experienced it. And then I also think it's opened his eyes to be a little more tender with all women, period. Yeah. I think he, as a man, just like never really saw the things that women had to carry.
I'm curious if you knew anyone else that had been through a NICU journey. Like, did you know anyone else in your friend network or your community, your family, that had experienced, sort of an early delivery, or, their child had to be admitted to a NICU?
So my mom didn't have a NICU journey, but she had shared that she had similar complications as me. Okay. I developed preeclampsia, and my mom did as well.
Okay.
But other than that, no, I didn't know anyone who had a NICU journey. To be honest, this is like wild, but like I was fresh out of college. It was like really the first time I even really heard of the NICU.
Yeah.
Did not know anyone who had been through similar experiences. And I think that's what made it feel so lonely. Was I was freshly married, freshly out of college, and going through this thing that I felt like nobody could identify with.
Looking back, aside healthcare professionals that actually listen to your concerns and your complaints, what else do you wish, you and your family got in the early days when you and your son were still in hospital?
Yeah, I think that I wish I would have gotten advice from women and from my doctor to know and understand what the possible complications could be. Because that's something I wanted to do, but people were like, that's not good for you or the baby. It's too negative. Don't focus on that. But like the doctor was like, oh, you have preeclampsia. I had no clue what that meant. I was like, what is that? And they literally had to give me a pamphlet that was sitting in her office, but she had never given to me before.
Oh, wow.
Like you're telling me this information about what's going on with me is available, but you didn't make it available until after it already happened. Like, that for me was frustrating. And I wish that people would have encouraged me kindly, like, yeah, look up the possibilities. Like, am I going to immerse myself in everything that could go wrong? No. But do I want to know what are the common, because when she responded to me, she made it clear like, oh, this is a common complication, but no one had told me it was common. I'd never even heard of it before. I just wish I would have had the opportunity to know the symptoms, because I think we would have caught it way earlier.
Absolutely. What did it feel like when your son first came home? Like when they're like, okay, did he eventually have to have the heart surgery, or were you able to avoid that?
No. Yeah, we avoided that just kind of miraculously. All of complications had kind of like just disappeared once he was born. Which was amazing, because the only reason why we even caught that he was small was because of the complications. So I think that when he came home, I felt relief, but I also felt sad because I felt robbed of an experience that I really wanted to have.
Yeah, you do feel very, very robbed of, a precious experience. So with that in mind, and obviously with the work that you do, what advice would you give to a parent who's currently on the NICU journey on just how to take care of yourself and like you said at the beginning, nobody's going to tell anyone that this is an easy journey, or that, it's something you're going to get over. Like you said, I love the way you described it, that it is a long grieving process. So what would you say to, another family on how to take care of themselves and just, mentally work through this?
Yeah, I think that the best thing you can do is let yourself feel whatever comes up. Like, don't try to be like, I'm not supposed to feel this, or I should. In the therapy world, we call it shoulding ourselves. Like, don't should yourself. Don't what you should or shouldn't feel. Allow yourself to just feel whatever is there. And also go to therapy. That was, for me, I remember literally bringing my little baby when he was sleeping to therapy and just crying with my therapist about how hard it all was and how lonely everything felt. And that was huge for me.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to go to therapy, I think when my son was about 2 years old, and I was actually quite shocked at the way I burst into tears. I think the first 3 sessions, the therapist was probably like, what is wrong with this woman? But I literally just cried for the 15 minutes. And I was so shocked that I still felt so strongly, and I still felt so hurt, and I still felt so scared about this thing that had happened to me. So I completely agree with you that speaking to a professional therapist that can really help you work through the emotions is so important, because you think you're not carrying them around, but you actually are, and they're clouding the way that you see things and respond to things. So yeah, that was a shocker. I was just like a huge crying ball, and I was like, okay, wow, I thought I was over this.
Yeah, and it's like a beautiful release when you finally get to cry as hard and as long as you need to, without people being like, all right, well, like, you'll be okay, and just be happy that your baby's healthy now. Because those weren't helpful responses.
Exactly. Do you remember the medical professionals at all, the doctors and nurses, the midwives that you came in contact with? Most of them, I'm sure you probably would never go back to their offices, but is there anyone at all, you remembered that was kind, or that, was really helpful, or really just had your back and advocated for the things that you complained about?
Yes, absolutely. The nurses were, without a doubt, the saving grace. They were like my angels. Every time I felt like the doctors were being vague, the nurses would wait till the doctor leave and then tell me what was actually going on. Like, when I was going into early labor, the nurses told me that moment. Like, the doctor was like, I can't tell you what's going on. I just need you to brush your teeth. Do not consume any food. Do not drink any water. I didn't know what was going on. I was just like, what's going on? And they were like, well, we can't tell you right now. I don't know why they couldn't, but the nurse just like pulled me aside when the doctor wasn't looking, was like, you're about to go into early labor. They're not supposed to tell you this. If you can eat something really quickly, try and do it. Like, there was just like this, it felt like there was a loyalty to me and a care for me as a person that they had, the doctors just didn't have. To this day, I actually have in my room a picture of Levi. One of the nurses noticed that Levi was growing pretty quickly in the NICU, and I hadn't been taking pictures because I was just so consumed with my work and sad and all the things. And so she brought her professional camera and took pictures of Levi in the NICU, and then printed them out and gave them to me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's so nice to have at least someone who's there that makes you feel seen.
Exactly. Makes you feel seen. Honestly, it's been amazing speaking to you. I'm going to send a little letter to, your entire family. Like, your spine needs a break. It's been through a lot,
Yes.
I'm laughing not because, what we're talking about isn't serious. I'm laughing because it's like I found community, and I found a story that I can relate to, like, as horrible as it sounds, because it's like, wow, Kobe just told Doshima, her spine was punctured and her baby was in hospital, and I'm giggling. Like, I'm giggling because it's so relatable, and I'm giggling because it's like, wow, that happened to me too, You have your podcast as well, so I want you to tell us a little bit about that, and of course we will have links to it in the show notes so that people can find it, because dealing with trauma is, especially after these types of situations, is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. First, thank you so much for having me. I loved chatting with you. So my podcast is called the Healing Circle Podcast. I host it with my husband, Kyle, and we talk about mental health, faith, and relationships. And you can find us on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. We also have the Healing Circle Podcast live in partnership with Spotify, where we do a live show every Monday at 7 p.m. on Green Room, which is Spotify's version of Clubhouse. And that way people can not just talk to us, rather not just hear us, but they can join the conversation and ask us questions live and talk to us. And so, yeah, you can get all that information. I'll send you the link so you can put it in the show notes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kobe.
Thank you.
You've just listened to My Neonatal Story, an Early Birth Foundation podcast. Please follow our Instagram page for free resources and subscribe to our show on iTunes and Google Play to make sure you don't miss the next episode. Thanks for tuning in today.